Is having a doctor really more dangerous than owning a gun? No, that's ridiculous. And medical error is not the third leading cause of death. Let's debunk this and find out why it's important to do so. Jonathan Jarry is a science communicator with McGill University's Office for Science and Society, OSS, dedicated to separating sense from nonsense on the scientific stage. He has a master's degree in molecular biology, and he brings his experience in cancer research, human genetics, rehabilitation research, and forensic biology to the work he does for the public. For 10 years, he was also the co-creator and co-host of the award-winning podcast, The Body of Evidence. But before we get to Jonathan Jarry, first, a word from our sponsor. You're listening to Succeed in Medicine, the show for practicing physicians who want to master the parts of their career and life that med school never prepared us for. From interpersonal skills to career navigation to the essential information every physician needs. I'm Dr. Bradley Block, and in every episode, we bring you brass tacks advice and immediately applicable insights from world-class experts, so you can feel prepared wherever your MD takes you and build a life in medicine that's sustainable, rewarding, and actually worth all those years of sacrifice. Jonathan Jarry, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation.
So there's this myth, and it is a myth, so we're going to be talking about that all show, that medical error is the third leading cause of death in the U.S. after heart disease and cancer, implying that physicians and the healthcare practitioners in general are either careless or incompetent or dangerous, right? But physicians, we take our patients home with us, not literally, but their complications, their adverse outcomes, they keep us up at night. And so the last thing we need is more of a burden when it's not correct, right? So what I want to start with is it a myth or is it true that medical error is the third leading cause of death?
So it's not true, and it would be surprising if it were. And it's quite scary to find out just how weak the paper is that led to this very, very sticky claim.
So let's start with the original paper, which is To Err is Human, Building a Safer Health System, that was in the Institute of Medicine. So what was this report?
So it was published in 2000, and its heart was absolutely in the right place. It's a 300-plus page report about patient safety, about why errors happen in healthcare, about voluntary reporting systems, how to protect them, about how to design better systems around this topic. But the problem is that to map out the extent of the problem, it looked at two studies. One was done in Colorado and Utah in 1992, and the other in New York in 1984. And they took numbers from these small and very regional studies, and they extrapolated to all hospital admissions in the United States. And their conclusion, based on this extrapolation, was that somewhere between 44,000 and 98,000 Americans were dying each year as a result of medical errors, which would place this type of error at least as the 8th leading cause of death in the US. And they define error as the failure of a planned action to be completed as intended, or the use of a wrong plan to achieve an aim. That seems fine to me, and I'm not a physician, but extrapolating from two limited studies to the entirety of a country is problematic, and unfortunately the problem just got worse with a paper that was published years later.
And that paper, I think, was interesting. And for one of the reasons, which is a little silly, but I think it bears mentioning. So it was written by one of the co-authors was the current commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Marty Makary, a surgeon from Hopkins, and it catapulted him in his career into fame. And it was Medical Error, the third leading cause of death in the US. And it was published in the British Medical Journal. And so for starters, I just want to know why a paper about medical error in the US was published in a British journal.
Well, I mean, I suspect because the BMJ is a highly prestigious journal. I think that at this point, the BMJ is no more British than the New England Journal of Medicine is limited to Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, right? So
I'm impressed how quickly, as a Canadian, you were able to rattle those off. That was very impressive.
But that's the point. I mean, the point is that the BMJ is just, at this point, is just like the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. It's just a very prestigious medical journal. Yeah. And of course, that lends a lot of weight to this quote unquote study that was published in it, and it gets repeated over and over and over again.
And I'm trying to add some levity to the situation. I recognize that. So that was the follow paper where Dr. Makary built on To Err is Human, right? And then made these claims that have now become part of the zeitgeist. And so what were some of the big flaws where we can say that it really isn't true that medical error is the third leading cause of death. What you're saying is there was a weak foundation. And so then we built upon this weak foundation.
So this is a publication that keeps getting cited, right? So 2016, BMJ, as you pointed out, co-written with Michael Daniel, who was at the time a research fellow. This is not a study. It's labeled an analysis. And what it really is, it's a call for better reporting of medical errors that is backed up by a very troublesome back of the envelope calculation. And so there are a number of sort of erroneous assumptions that underlie this whole thing. First of all, the studies that were used, much like in the Institute of Medicine report 16 years earlier, they were never meant to be generalized to the entirety of the hospitalized US population. One of these studies was done in beneficiaries of Medicare. So people who are 65 years old or older, people with disabilities, people who have end-stage renal disease requiring dialysis or transplant. Are they representative of Americans who are currently in hospital? No, it's a skewed sample. Turns out that 1 in 10 people in American hospitals is there to deliver a baby. So here you're not comparing apples to oranges, you are turning apples into oranges to generate your data. So medical errors might be more prevalent in a patient population that requires much more care and many more medical actions than in somebody who is there for a routine birth, and so it inflates the numbers. Another big problem with Makary's analysis is that the studies it combines, with rare exceptions, reported very few deaths. One of them had 12 deaths, another had 9, and another 14. Those are small numbers, and when you blow them up to the entirety of the United States, I doubt that extrapolation will be representative.
Right. So that extrapolation is kind of like having a small sample size. You've got a small sample size, your statistics are not going to be very convincing. And so because they're using a small data set, the extrapolation is much more likely to be erroneous. On top of another thing, which is that you talk about in your article, which is it's difficult to determine causality. So it was really interesting to hear from someone that later went on to be a COVID denier, right? He didn't deny the existence of it, but rather a minimizer, right? And so how do we know? Well, actually, we can listen to my podcast from a year or two with Jonathan Howard, where he wrote a whole book about these, basically most of the current administration in the United States right now. And so a lot of what they were saying was they didn't die of COVID, they died with COVID, right? And so the reverse was done in this paper where it's hard to determine, did you die of a medical error or did you die with a medical error, right? Like if you were given 2 medications that interact with each other that you shouldn't, but there wasn't any untoward impact, right, that led to your demise, but then you went on to die, did you die with a medical error, which, you discussed is very hard to determine because if you show that to medical experts, they very often disagree whether it was or wasn't a cause of death. So it seems really hypocritical, effectively, to say people died with COVID, not of COVID. And yet here you're saying they died of medical errors and not with medical errors.
It's a very astute observation, and it shows that we're all, to one degree or another, we're all driven by motivated reasoning, right? We look for evidence that reinforces what we already believe in. And especially those of us with university degrees, we're very good at convincing ourselves that we're being objective and consistent because we read fancy papers, right? And we understand them. And as you point out, again, one of the central criticisms of this BMJ Makary paper about medical errors is indeed that the studies that were used, they looked at medical errors followed by death. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these errors caused these deaths. There was a very good commentary in the BMJ actually about this by Dr. Shojania and Professor Dixon Woods. And the example they give is of a patient in the ICU with multi-system organ failure due to infection. And the doctor makes a mistake, gives an antibiotic that the patient had an allergic reaction to in the past. Patient gets a rash, a new antibiotic is prescribed, but then a week later, the patient dies from organ failure. Was there a medical error? Yes. Did the rash cause the organ failure? No. So just because an error was made, which is bad, does not necessarily mean that the error caused a death.
Are there any other either erroneous assumptions or egregious extrapolations that you'd like to mention about the Makary paper?
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, those are the really important points, and those are very important points. And so when you look at all of these counter arguments, it's really hard to stand by the numbers that are shown in this analysis, again, not even an actual study, because the underlying data set and how the data set is being used is so egregiously wrong that you can't trust the end result.
You spent years learning how to save lives, but no one taught you how to secure your own. When you work one-on-one with a CFP professional financial coach, you get a blueprint tailored for the long game of your complex situation. At My Financial Coach, they help physicians choose the best strategy to optimize your annuities and investments, implement tax-saving strategies, and tackle debt like your student loans or mortgage while refining your path to retirement. Save up for that boat, a child's college or wedding, or even a vacation home. Plan ahead for the impacts of the unexpected and understand how much life insurance you actually need. Project how getting married, raising children, or taking care of an aging parent affects the progress towards your goals. Advice-only financial planning through a fixed monthly subscription, not commissions, to keep planning unbiased and in your best interest. A financial plan isn't just about your money, it's about your future. Visit myfinancialcoach.com/physician's guide to doctoring to meet with a financial coach and find out if concierge financial planning is right for you. Again, myfinancialcoach.com/physician's guide to doctoring. But why does it matter, right? Why does it matter? Because we know that medical error is something we should address, right? In the same way the airline industry, anytime there's a crash, right? Anytime there's an accident, they're going to rigorously go over what happened and what systems could be put in place to prevent that from happening. And so healthcare really should be using that same kind of rigor. And so whether it's the 3rd or the 15th or the 30th leading cause of death, why does it matter where it falls in the statistics if we should just continue to do our best to minimize the likelihood of something happening?
Because it can drive patients away from medical care. I mean, when you're saying that medical error is a 3rd leading cause of death in the United States, that is extremely scary. Here are some spin-offs of the Makary paper that I've seen online. So some exemplifications made using Makary's numbers that I've seen online. I've seen the claim based on this analysis that more Americans are killed in U.S. hospitals every 6 months than died in the entire Vietnam War. That medical errors killed the equivalent of 3 fully loaded jumbo jets crashing every other day, and that these errors and injuries are epidemics born of a cult of denial and complacency. So these are things that people read, and if you're being told that, you might think to yourself that going to the hospital for your cancer is a bad idea. And instead, you go see a naturopath or an acupuncturist or a homeopath. And these alternatives to medicine, they offer very little benefits beyond temporary placebo effects while your medical condition progresses. So to me, as someone who reports on pseudoscience for a living, that is the biggest harm from this grossly inflated number that will not go away, is that it's unnecessarily scaring people away from medicine, and de facto it is seducing people into the arms of unproven and disproven interventions.
So you might have answered it already with what you just said, but why do you think this number, despite being so incorrect and debunked, has been so sticky?
It taps into primal emotions, right? Fear, disgust, anger. I think that most of us have experienced, if not physical harm from medicine, that at least episodes of being dismissed, of being disbelieved, of not being given the right diagnosis fast enough. And so this sticky idea of 3rd leading cause of death, it echoes on a much larger scale these bad experiences. And it also taps into this grand conspiracy theory that a lot of people believe in, which is that medical doctors are uncaring people who are paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, and they're there to collect a paycheck, and whatever happens to their patients is none of their concern. And in fact, it's more lucrative to keep a patient sick than it is to heal them. There's a shocking study by Oliver and Wood in JAMA Internal Medicine, which used a representative sample of American adults that were polled online. And it shows that over a third of them, and I will repeat this, over a third of them agree that the FDA is deliberately preventing the public from getting natural cures for cancer because of big pharma. And another third neither agrees nor disagrees. So this distrust of the medical establishment is deeply entrenched in American life.
So we had an episode a couple of weeks, or at this point might be a couple of months ago, with a physician. His name is Jordan Grummett. He's a hospice physician, but he wrote a book about purpose. And what we talked about there is how physicians are not driven by profit. I mean, certainly we do well with what we do, and there are incentives to either see more patients and unfortunately sometimes do more procedures. But if we were driven solely by profit, we wouldn't be able to sleep at night because we'd behave so egregiously. And as such, we are driven primarily by purpose. And our purpose is to help our patients. And if we didn't genuinely believe in our heart of hearts that we're doing that, we wouldn't be able to sleep at night because we're not psychopaths, right? And so to think that we're withholding cures, people are intentionally doing this on a systemic level, it just shows a complete lack of understanding of how we work as humans. And I think this works also to dehumanize us. And therefore, they can use this statistic to their leverage because that gets them to think like we're ghouls. It's horrific to think that people behave like this.
I agree, but grand conspiracy theories are very popular, and they give people this very simple narrative of good guys and bad guys, and it explains everything that is wrong with the world. It's just these mustache-twirling villains who are part of a cabal, and they meet in secret, and they're manipulating the world. And of course, there is some truth to that. There are power differentials and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people believe in these very simplistic narratives. And it's sad. I mean, I've worked with a lot of medical doctors, back when I was a student and when I was working in a clinical lab, and I did a podcast with a cardiologist for many years. And that is not the view of doctors that I got, of like these mustache twirling villains who are just trying to earn as much money as they can. These people really care about what they do. They're part of a system that is often deeply flawed and filled with bad incentives, and they're trying to make the best of it. I myself have been dismissed by certain doctors as a thing. I've had a doctor misread a laboratory report. So I've been the victim of a medical error, though a fairly minor one. So I understand that when you go through these experiences, and if you're not familiar, if you don't have a doctor in your life and nobody in your family is a doctor, it's easy to otherize this profession and to see them as these cold robots who are utterly corrupted by the pharmaceutical industry. But that has not been my experience.
Picture this. You're sipping your favorite cocktail on a spacious balcony. The sun is melting into the sea, and you just saw the green flash. Behind you, an even more spacious suite is waiting for you. You work hard. You deserve a little luxury. Whether you're planning your next voyage or dreaming of one, Luxury Cruising with Dr. Crystal Sodaitis takes you there. From insider tips to the world's most elegant ships, join her as she explores the world in style. Search Luxury Cruising and subscribe. Your pampered adventure awaits.
I mean, if you're looking for a mustache-twirling villain, there are plenty of them out there. They're the ones that manipulate the algorithms so that teenage girls feel more insecure about themselves and causes mental health issues in middle schoolers, right? You're looking for a villain, they're front and center. It's very clear who the villains are in this story, but we digress. So I do want to ask, because it's going to come up in conversation, right? It's going to get brought up again. We're going to hear it. The listeners are going to hear it, that medical error is the third leading cause of death. And so how do we push back against that without being dismissive of legitimate patient safety concerns?
So I will repeat a point that was made by Benjamin Mazer and Chadi Naban in a publication about this topic, that when you look at Makary's highest estimate in his analysis, restaurant napkin, doodle, his highest estimate is that 62% of all hospital deaths are due to medical error. I think that most people, unless they're deeply distrustful of medicine, and these people are out there, but I think that most people will acknowledge that it makes no sense that 2/3 of people dying in a hospital do so because a doctor or a nurse made a mistake. I think that's the first part to explain to people.
So in order for that to be the actual number, you would need almost 2/3 of people in a hospital, or at least 2/3 of hospital deaths to be due to medical error. So in order for it to be the third leading cause of death, that would need to be the case.
Which is absurd, right? And so you can then point out that this was not a study, but it was a clumsy bit of overgeneralization that was filled with major gaps, that we have better, more reliable numbers now, and that the issue is real, and that there are no useful fictions in medicine.
Amazing. Amazing. Is there anything else on this topic that because I think we've covered it. I think we've covered it quite thoroughly, but just in case there's something else you want to discuss, is there anything else that you think bears mentioning with regards to this?
Well, yeah, I mentioned that we have better numbers. Now, it is genuinely challenging to know because many people believe that these numbers are underreported, and I agree with that sentiment. People may be afraid of losing their job. It's instead of looking at it through the lens of ranking cause of deaths and more as a percentage of hospital deaths, as I mentioned. So again, this top-end estimate from the Makary paper was 62%, which is ridiculous. What do we have? We have a study in the UK that reported 3.6% of hospital deaths due to preventable medical error. There's a Norwegian study coming up with 4.2%, and there's a meta-analysis, which I believe used worldwide data, that reported an estimate of 5% for preventable harm, with 12% of this 5%, meaning a total of 0.6%, dying because of this harm. So it's much less than what Makary guesstimated. It's still too much. It's still a real problem. But those are the best numbers that I could find back when I wrote about this for the McGill Office for Science and Society back in 2021.
So what you're saying is it's not 62, but possibly 0.6. So 1/100th of what was stated.
It is much, much, much smaller than what was stated in this incredibly sticky paper that just will not go away.
Well, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate, one, the article that you wrote, taking it all down, and the time you took to talk to us today, and all the work you do for science communication. So I've been following you for a long time online, so it's great to finally meet you, right? Little fanboy situation here. But if my listeners want to find you, want to follow you as well, where can we find you online?
So mcgill.ca/OSS is the website of our office at McGill. It's an office that is dedicated to separating sense from nonsense on scientific issues. It's been in existence since 1999. And so people can go there and read our articles. If people want to find me on social media, pretty much the only place that I'm still on social media these days is Blue Sky. So they can just search for my name on Blue Sky and I will pop up.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan Jarry, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means either you fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please write us a 5-star review, take a screenshot, and email it to me so I can send you a quick guide on how to earn patient trust in 20 seconds or less. Email me at brad@physiciansguidetodoctoring.com and feel free to suggest a topic or guest. I take your requests seriously. The views expressed on this episode are those of the interviewer and the interviewee and do not represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting makes it sound like I'm talking directly to you, this is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or legal advice, or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to Succeed in Medicine.